Hello, everyone. Today is Saturday, August 1st, 2020. I'm Bob Diebold, Vice Chairman of the Committee for the Global Endeavor. Today, we continue with Phase 8 in the 41st webinar in our series of webinars on the topic, Comparing and Contrasting the True Teachings of Jesus with the Traditional Tenets and Practices of Organized Institutional Christianity. This is Topic 8 in the study guide called Revelation Revealed. Neil Waldrop is the author and also the chairman of our committee. I'm turning the webinar over to him now. Neil, over to you.
Thank you, Bob. It is once again a great pleasure to be with you and with our other participants for these webinars. We are indeed on the 41st today. And for those viewers who may not have been following our series, I would state that the series as a whole is based on a document that I wrote in the middle of the year 2016, Revelation Revealed, specifically topic 8 in that document, the topic that Bob indicated. But that at the moment, we are working on an elaboration, a supplement that I wrote in the middle of 2019, last year, called Living the Real Religion of Jesus. This essay is 18 pages and we are coming close to the end of it. So for those of you who may not have been following our series, I would recommend strongly that if you do not have these documents available, that you proceed to download them. You will be able to follow our discussion much more effectively if you do have the material in front of you. The most important document for that purpose is my essay, Living the Real Religion of Jesus. The underlying large document is Revelation Revealed. Both of these documents are available from the website of the Committee for the Global Endeavor, and I give you the citation as follows: www.globalendeavor.net. I say again, www.globalendeavor.net. And in this citation, global endeavor is treated as if it were a single word, no punctuation, no space in the middle. The links that will enable you to download these documents are about 2/3 of the way through the page that I have just indicated. Now, because you have no possibility of asking us questions while we are talking, we offer you the option of sending us in a question by email. If you wish to do that, you would use the email address, which is likewise at the bottom of the homepage, and it is very simple: info@globalendeavor.net. If you send us a question that we decide to use during a future program, we reserve the right to edit the wording. And if we do use it, then you will get an answer from all participants in that program, not just from me personally. So having gone through all the procedural and information, I will now identify the location that we are discussing at the beginning of our webinar today. And that location is page 16 of my document, Living the Real Religion of Jesus, specifically formal question Q at the bottom of that page. And these questions are, in effect, an opportunity for each participant to express a personal opinion. And it is my practice normally to read these formal questions. So I will go forward with the first element, which is formal question Q. It reads as follows: in the second paragraph of the excerpt, which is an excerpt from section 5 of paper 155, Jesus declares, quote, "The religion of the Spirit means effort, struggle, conflict, faith, determination, love, loyalty, and progress," unquote. Shall we understand this candor of his as truth in advertising, or is Jesus implicitly recommending that believers focus on the importance and significance of the final three elements? In other words, quote, "love, loyalty, and progress," unquote, while accepting the practical reality that early steps along the path are likely to include the first three factors, quote, effort, struggle, conflict, unquote. In your view, how do the 8 elements of the series relate to each other? Do the middle 2 elements, in other words, quote, faith, determination, unquote, constitute a catalyst and fulcrum that can and should propel the believer onward? Now, as the first candidate for reply, I am inclined to recommend a colleague who has not been with us for quite some time. And he probably understands that my baton is going in his direction. And the person in question is Andre Rodatis. Your turn, Andre.
Well, thank you, Neil. It's an interesting question, and I was musing about that. It's something that one of our friends and scholars with the Urantia book focuses on as a very important series that is almost interdependent and prerequisite, such that the other features are concomitant upon having dealt with the previous element. So, for instance, there is no struggle if you've not put in any effort. There's no conflict if you haven't put in effort and struggle, and so on. And that's one of his ways of looking at that. And I bring it up not because I necessarily hold to it, but I think I like these as provocations. I think we're meant to be creatively stimulated to search out these things. And I appreciate the question on that basis. What it brought immediately to mind for me was the concept that was put out on the stages of change, put out by Norcross and Prochaska in their book many years ago, probably 20, 30 years ago by now, called Changing for Good. And in that book, they put together 6 stages of change. Now, those stages of change that they put forward were the following: pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, maintenance, and termination. As related to this, what it struck me was that this series is really dealing with possibly preparation, but really the beginning of the action steps all the way through maintenance and termination of a process of change, which is frankly recognition that the result has been achieved in some way. And so what this strikes me as is underscoring the idea of the goal orientation of true spirituality. In that same paragraph, it is contrasted immediately with the religion of the mind, the theology of authority, which he says requires little or none of these exertions from its formal believers. Tradition is a safe refuge and an easy path. And therefore, I would say is not a path to change, let alone progress. And so what strikes me is that with regard to comparing this to a process of change, the effort would be possibly tantamount to the first 3 stages. Pre-contemplation is that stage, in short, of I need to make a change someday. I need to look at this. Perhaps I need to quit smoking, to take an example, for instance, or whatever that might be. Contemplation is saying, I really ought to make a beginning at this, and this is a serious problem, or this is something I really would like to undertake as a positive goal. And finally, the other aspect of effort would be, okay, if I'm really going to undertake to do this, I have to prepare in a certain number of ways. I need to schedule what I'm going to do. I need to clearly understand the goal. and perhaps set some stages for how I'm going to achieve that goal. So then what really is interesting to me about this is how struggle, conflict, faith, and determination and love are good spiritual markers for am I taking effective action on this spiritual problem? Am I is it a worthy problem in that it causes struggle? We're also told elsewhere in the book, I'll look up the quote later, that there is no real progress if there's no conflict. That's all spiritual, or that all spiritual progress entails a certain amount of conflict. To that, I would say then faith, the willingness to act as though the goal is worthy and deserves further action, acting as if that is a worthy goal, is important enough. If I truly have faith in it, it's important enough that I continue to act on it. That in turn requires determination. It requires activation of the will, and hopefully through faith, having brought God into the process. Ultimately, if it's a spiritual thing, it's going to involve love. It's going to involve there being good, desiring to do good to others. Loyalty then, for me, corresponds to the maintenance step. If I'm loyal, I'm willing to continue with something that is a goal that's worthy to keep doing. And progress is only really understood after the fact. It's only sometime down the road that you understand that you may have achieved what you've done, whether it be quitting smoking, which is a fairly tangible thing, but in say less tangible ways, it's hard to see quote unquote spiritual growth in oneself unless one looks far back generally. So I can see that from the time I was 5 years old to now, I have grown spiritually. I have matured a little bit, but generally it requires some hindsight.
Thank you. Doreen, I'd like to recognize you next, and I would comment before you begin speaking that I have noticed in many of your contributions during previous webinars, you have emphasized the importance of love, a point that I agree with. But if we look at this sequence, there are 5 elements that come before love in this sentence: effort, struggle, conflict, faith, and determination. And then only finally after those 5 does one reach love. How would you deal with that? Or anything that Andre said?
Well, Andre said a lot, which is excellent. And okay, so let me begin by saying that it's, the religion of the spirit, the whole goal is towards unification, right? So how do you get there? It's a plan, but it has to be done little by little. You just can't immerse yourself into something and all of a sudden, you become something. It's a whole lifetime work and then some. So I would say to you, as you begin to spiritually awake, right? What happens is the driving force, that leads you to be born again. And that, that to me is the plan. How do you become born again, born of the spirit? And once, it's like, it's growth, it evolves slowly, the struggle, the conflict, right, Andre is absolutely right, the challenge, but it pushes us to let go of us, the old me. But it never diminished my love for God. It was the growth in me, the challenge that I had to overcome my inadequacies. But God, I always loved and never stopped loving him, no matter how hard, no matter what challenges and obstacles came. It had nothing to do with that. So when you're talking about to love other people, to love your brothers and your sisters, well, that's a different story. And that's where the born again comes in, where you know, the goal, you know, through all those things, you just start to change. And the thing is, you don't give up. You know, when love fills you, it transforms the way you see life. So I began to see life differently. As I, you know, as I was challenged, and the obstacles and the adversities and all the stuff we talked about from week to week, yeah, it does something to you. But if you give up and you just want a life of comfort, you know, you don't want all the stress, which a lot of people, you know, find religion as a comfort, but it doesn't mean born of the Spirit. It just means, you know, the comfort of religion. Well, I didn't see life that way. So, you know, remember, loving God brings out the totality in us, connecting with God. It makes us unified. It helps us to be more than we are, more than we think we are. And through that, that's how, you know, how do you reach divine reality? The only way it's manifested is through that, you know, love of the thought adjuster. And it pilots you, you know, into different, to survival, which is the goal. If we're, you know, if we don't have our eye on where we want to go, then you can't figure out how to get there. So when I looked at all the steps, and yes, it's fine, but it also depends, you know, on, I don't know, your beliefs and your decisions and your determination, just what you said, and the faith. But when I was looking up something with Jesus, what did he say? He said all that other stuff, you know, the determinations, but the whole point was the love and the faith he had for God. And that was, they said he was the most religious person ever on this planet. So you said you pass from death to life, and that's, to me, you know, the authority. What I did like, the authority of tradition, and how it said from a racial faith inherited to a personal faith by actual experience. And I thought, how many people stick with the religion of their inheritance, of their families? I knew a lot of people that changed it, you know, so it's not necessarily a given that you're loyal to your family and the faith. And I remember years ago, I don't know if anybody else remembers, it was a Dr. Paul, and he lived in upstate New York, and he changed from Christianity to Judaism. And he came to and he got killed on the way to Texas for a medical conference. He was in a small plane, and it crashed. So it was unfortunate, but you know, I like talking to a lot of people and getting personal experiences from them. And I find, you know, there's a lot of things that the book talks about, but they don't have any clue. And they call themselves, you know, faithers. They have faith in Christianity, but what does it mean? It's one day a week when you go to church, you know. So why this gives us, to me, wonderful opportunity, you know, to find God for yourself, through your own personal experience, through your own struggles. How could you not change the way you live your life because you know what the goal is? So if you know what the goal is, it's an automatic. You have to be able to recognize the steps how to get there. But I know the book always talks about all these things and steps and blah, blah, blah. I never think about the steps. It's like, what does it matter? I'm living my life, and the Spirit is leading me to, you know, to these experiences. And if this is how I grow, and if this is how I find God, well, so be it. But I'm not, oh, am I doing this? Am I doing that? And I hear sometimes on the programs, on the Zooms, oh, you know, they lay out a formula for themselves. I never, who would ever think of that? And maybe because it wasn't my religion, maybe that's why I never thought about it. But I don't know. I'd love to know what other people think about it. Anyway, I have a lot to say, but I won't say it all here. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. George, I'd like to turn to you next and first offer you an opportunity to comment on anything that anyone has said so far. But it also is an opportunity perhaps to comment on the way that I wrote the question, which is implicitly the idea of a sequence, one thing after another. And much of Andre's comments also involves a sequence. So the opportunity, however, would be for you to declare, if you wish, that these elements of which there are 8, are essentially simultaneous. And there's not a requirement to go through all the preceding ones before you get to love, loyalty, and progress, that they all exist at once. At least that is one option that you could consider. And of course, you are free to comment in any way you like.
Thanks. I really enjoyed your discussion of the series, your friend's discussion of what he thought the series meant, and your discussion of it. I thought that was very interesting. I hadn't looked at it in quite that way, and I liked your story. And I thought, you know, you made a point you made about love unifies everything, regardless of what the steps are. And I actually found myself going in that direction, which ties right into your offer of looking at this list, not as a series, but as a whole. And, you know, as I read through them, it seems to me these 8 elements are more like an encouragement than a warning, or as you put it, truth in advertising. Seem more like a challenge than a caution. Religions of the mind approach God through intellectual belief, and their emphasis upon uniformity of belief perpetuates mediocrity, in my opinion. You know, the prosaic attitude that is content with average attainment. The religion of the spirit stimulates initiative, a striving for spiritual excellence. And in the third sentence, Jesus compares the plodding path of half-hearted belief to his heroic ideal of faith as the supreme adventure of time and space. So that's quite a contrast he makes. And I noticed some other things about this list. I mean, they can be considered in different combinations, as you suggested, of which there are 255. 2 to the 8th power minus 1. But a noticeable aspect of this list is that faith is the only element necessarily related to God. The other 7 can be present in both religious experience and secular experience. So faith is the one essential element in the religion of the spirit, but faith without these other elements really is merely passive assent. The second aspect of this list is its apparent incompleteness. It doesn't include the elements of sincerity, courage, or perseverance, which Doreen mentioned indirectly. For instance, the keys to the kingdom of heaven are sincerity, more sincerity, and more sincerity. Fear not was the watchword of Jesus. Spiritual progress requires perseverance, which I think Andre brought up. So only the combinations of these elements, which include faith, are relevant to the religion of the spirit, it seems to me. In fact, you know, from a formal perspective, which this gets directly to your offer, Neil, these elements of experience can be organized in a cosmic system in which faith is the individuality of personal religion of the spirit. Quoting from paper 112, in a cosmic system, the individual members are not connected with each other except in relation to the whole and through the individuality of the whole.
Thank you. Bob, I would like to turn to you next. And I would point out that the wording of the sentence we are examining is pretty close to the idea of a definition. The religion of the spirit means. That is pretty much the way that one gives a definition in a dictionary. Something means something else. So I'm inclined to ask you whether you look upon this as a definition or as a recipe or as an experience with many different elements that are either sequential or essentially simultaneous. What would you say? Is this a definition or a recipe or an experience or some combination of the above?
Thanks, Neil. Well, I didn't expect it to be a definition. When I looked at that list, I saw it the same way that Andre saw it, and that is that potentially each one has a causality to the next one. And frankly, I looked at those again and thought, well, that's really not exactly right. There seems to be a gestaltic picture here. So before I answer that in a little bit more detail, let me cover the religion of the spirit just for a little bit here. Last week we talked about this, about the source material that came in from paper 155. I find it very interesting that the midwayers actually went to humans who were thinking about these particular concepts that we are quoted by Jesus actually for these particular words. There's 12 references in the entire papers, and there's only 12 references of the phrase religion of the spirit, and 11 of them are in paper 155, and in 173 it points back to 155. So this is a concept that they wanted to. It seems to me that the revelators wanted to really attribute this to Jesus and really attribute this theme, which we started to talk about, and which this particular paragraph with the sequence of terms are related to the religion of the spirit comes from. So I thought, okay, well, let me just do a little bit more digging about, is there anything that really defines what the religion of the spirit is? Steve and I brought up the source material of Auguste Sabatier. And it seems to me that this particular concept of the division or the juxtaposition between the religions of authority and the religion of the spirit really didn't arise in Christianity or in Western Occidental society until the 19th century, right around the middle of the 19th century. And that's when the literature really just seemed to blossom. As a matter of fact, if we do look at the source material for all the revelation, we're finding that, it's easy to see that there was some tremendous thinking going on at that period of time and being documented, particularly, I think, because of the fact that this religion of authority and industrialism, society was on the move, was forcing this breakaway from totalitarian ecclesiasticism towards secularism that forced the religious folks to start thinking, or I should say the theologic folks to start thinking and to write about these ideas and concepts. So it's real interesting that Jesus spoke about these things 2,000 years before what apparently to me seems to be almost as strong of a religious event as the 6th century BC. The 6th century BC was Lao Tse and Confucius and Gautama, and in fact the papers talk about that there was a spectacular explosion of religious thought that probably was really necessary. Maybe the Master Seraphim supported, well, let's see, were they there then? Yeah, I guess they were. That basically supported the humans who obviously had to be self-revealed because Jesus hadn't been on the scene until this time. So I find that interesting, the religion of the spirit. Now go back to the question, is this a definition? I didn't see it that way, but I did see it as a triad. And I think that in your question, you sort of intimated that. And let me get to the question here, because you did ask, oh yeah, here it is. Is Jesus implicitly recommending that believers focus on the importance and significance of the first three elements, love, loyalty, progress, while accepting the practical reality that early steps along the path are likely to include the first three factors, effort, struggle, and conflict? And then you come out with a very interesting part of the question. Do the middle two elements, faith and determination, constitute a catalyst and fulcrum that can and should propel the behavior onward? Well, you made me think about the dialectic, Hegelian dialectic, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And that's kind of the way that your question, at least the premise in your question about how to look at this list, either it's a causality from A to B, or I should say A to F, or it's in parallel in some ways. And I thought, well, that's a little bit hard to determine. But then again, if you look at it, because everything in our papers, many things in our papers are in triads. And this particular one is very interesting because we seem to move from matter to mind to spirit. And I think if you take the first three, we're talking more material elements here. Effort, struggle, and conflict. And the first thing that came to mind about all that was affliction. It's the worst thing in the universe never to be afflicted. I should say the worst affliction in the universe is not to be afflicted. And I'm paraphrasing that particular philosophical statement that's supposed to be parallel to a moda statement. Faith and determination, obviously, you use the terms, is it a catalyst or fulcrum? And that's where the thesis is, because I've got to almost, in the thesis antithesis, the tension between this new thought, faith and determination, obviously, is something that both that all three speakers previous to me talked about. Seems to me that it's the antithesis of this material, but to move to spiritual, you've got to synthesize those two. So that's how I saw that particular one. And in relation to this idea of the religion of the spirit, I think that, we can look at this in many different ways. We can look at it as causality serially. We can look at it as causality in parallel. And I should say that Andre's ideas of change fit perfectly in everything we do in life, in any kind of a project that we should take. Those are the kind of elements that we ought to be thinking about. So was Jesus challenging? Was he threatening? I think he was just stating the way that things have to actually occur for us to get to truly understand how to move from matter through mind to get to spirit. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about what the religion of the spirit actually is, because that's where we're headed here. Back to you, Neil.
Thank you. My next person on the list has to be Marvin. And I must at least almost apologize, because I started off with turning to Andre, stating that he was the person who had been the farthest absent, the longest absent. But I discovered when I looked back at the list that Marvin has been absent for exactly the same amount of time. And so, yes, there's just 2 webinars, but so it reminds me of the statement that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, for many are cold, but few are frozen. I suppose in Nevada in the month of August, there are not too many people who are frozen, but maybe that is a cause for effort and struggle. So, sir, it is yours now.
Well, with that as an introduction, I'm not sure which direction I can go in, up or down, but I'm going to move.
Go however you wish, sir.
I think there is a 3-part sequence here to my sensibilities. And Bob, you a little bit stole my thunder. I was going to talk about the dialectic issue, so I'll want to sort of start there and pick it up with some of your thoughts. Yeah, I think there is a dialectic here, meaning there's a sequence of a force, a counterforce, and then a synthesizing of the two forces. So the thesis here is initially we have situations where there are effort, struggle, and conflict. And then in response to those circumstances, we can mobilize our faith. We can determine to rise to the occasion, to rise to meet these challenges. And as we do that, and then we proceed to implement that which our faith and determination kind of yields in response to the difficulties of circumstance. I think we grow in our ability to love, we manifest greater loyalty, and we make progress. So I do think there's a dialectical sequence. Sorry, I just moved around. I just lost the page. I'm going to move back to it. So that's one thought. And then the other thought is, I think this process, this dialectic process happens continuously in our lives. It's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. I think there are always new circumstances that arise that challenge us, new difficulties, and we have to remuster our faith and our determination, and then we make further progress in the way of love and loyalty and spiritual growth in a variety of ways, progress. And then the last thought is, I think oftentimes in any one period in our lives, we have various parts of this cycle going on simultaneously. Different things challenge us. Other things we're making progress and we've mastered, sometimes simultaneously. So there's multiple layers of challenge, rise to the occasion, growth and forward movement, all going on in at different time sequence in different ways in our lives. So, but I think the same pattern plays out. So I appreciate that, Neil. I hadn't seen that for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you. I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Marvin.
No, I wanted to make a sort of a parenthetical comment and I forgot, so I'll just make it now. Pardon me for being off camera for periods of time. It's just sitting for such long periods. I've got to get up and move around. It's kind of getting to my body. And so I'll block video, so I don't want to be distracting when that's happening. So just by way of explanation.
That's perfectly fine. For the purposes of the recording, the presence of people who are not speaking is not visible. In other words, the recording focuses on the person speaking.
Oh,
and the fact that you are somewhere else in the room is not evident in the recording. So that's perfectly okay. All right, no, I think we've had an extremely interesting discussion of question Q, which leads to formal question R at the top of page 17, which I will proceed to read. If we examine the excerpt's second paragraph from an analytical perspective, it is clear that Jesus is contrasting the religion of the spirit with the religion of the mind. Further, the dashes that serve to link the initial phases of the second sentence implicitly identify, quote, the religion of the mind, unquote, with, quote, the theology of authority, unquote. Does theology automatically entail authority, or does this occur so often as to justify a broad association that seems accurate and persuasive? I think the logic of the previous responses make it reasonable for me to call on Bob first, because he called attention to the comparison of the religion of the spirit and the religion of mind. And the question indeed adds the idea of theology. So he hoped before that we would continue to talk about the religion of the spirit and the religion of the mind, and now it comes around to him for the first opportunity to do that.
Okay, I'll be the first at bat here for this one, Neil, and hopefully get on base. This is an interesting part of this question, and it's also an interesting part of the first and second discourse. Again, as in the first term that I provided, this religion of the mind and religion of authority are the same terms that showed up in the second half of the 19th century and wound up being only in paper 155 and in the Discourse of Religion. It's as though the revelators, to me, and I'm kind of throwing this out a little parenthetically here, it's a little bit more, I had to think about, your questions are penetrating. Because, well, I should say that now being able to use Google and to use archive.org really enables one, such as myself, when I want to find out, well, what do these terms actually mean? I know where the paper, I know where the midwayers are taking these, and I know that they focused on them on Jesus in the first and second discourse of religion, but they wouldn't have put those in there unless there was something that had to be a human concept and a human thought. And again, I'm kind of restating what I said before, that I'm still amazed at the second half of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century when the papers became indicted. It was that 100 years or so in which this thematic thinking about the differentiation between the theology of authority and the religion of authority and religion of the spirit really took hold upon some really eloquent writers. And as Steve said, he thought that was Steve had sent me a note, following our discussion, because I had found the religion of the Sabatier's book, Religion of Authority and the Religion of Spirit, which, by the way, is not the actual. Matthew Block does not think it's the actual source material used for there. It was some of the sermons that came after that, but it was a profound French book that was translated almost immediately into English, and it became part of the high cosmic thinking. I think of many individuals that became self-revealed at that particular time. And I'm just saying this parenthetically. So, all right, so now let's get to the question. Theology, Neil, you brought up theology. Let me just make a statement here. The Melchizedek tells us in paper 103 that theology is always the study of your religion, and the study of another religion is psychology. Now, in this particular paragraph, there's in 155, section 5, paragraph 11, where it says the religion of the mind hyphen the theology of authority hyphen requires little or none of the exertions of its former believers. So the midwayers are definitely making a statement here that to get stuck in the mind, to get stuck with this thesis, and to never move through the antithesis to synthesize moving forward into the religion of the spirit. It does not require, when an individual doesn't use that, it is sad to record there is so little cosmic thinking going on, then the individual doesn't really wind up with a spiritual experience. And I think at that point, that's when the study of another religion is psychology, of course, that the theology of authority then becomes static. It then becomes dead. And this is what these thinkers were saying at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, is that there is a tremendous movement towards freeing up the mind and stepping out of these static areas that now requires effort, struggle, conflict, faith, determination, love, loyalty, and progress. So I'll just kick that off and think about what I've got sort of left on this, and turn it over to the group.
Thank you, Bob. George, the principle of authority is linked with the idea of theology. We earlier discussed that the idea that the inheritance from the authoritarian patterns of the Roman Empire imposed authority and uniformity on Christianity. And now, of course, theology is part of that. So I wonder whether this linkage of authority with the theology of Christianity is so firm that you would be inclined to agree that authority is part of theology almost invariably.
I think, yeah, as a general statement, I would agree with that. A religion of the mind is, to my way of thinking, always authoritative. I mean, it has to say what must be believed and why it must be believed. I take a little bit of a different perspective on the term theology of authority. I think there are two aspects to it. I mean, you know, the theology of authority says why you should believe what a religion tells you is true. By what authority does a religion do that? They have to cite some authority. Otherwise, it's just an idea. And so in Christianity, following Peter's confession, Jesus delegated authority to the apostles in the view of Christianity. And this includes the ecclesiastical authority to definitively interpret the revealed word of God. But in addition to this delegated authority, which has been exercised by Christianity almost from the beginning, or I should say from the beginning, its theology also recognizes the direct spiritual authority of the Spirit of truth. And the indwelling presence of this Spirit is called the Paraclete in Christian theology. And it seems to me Christianity's recognition of this spiritual authority makes it superior to all other existing religions. And let me back that up. Michael began organizing his local universe 400 billion years ago. And from the beginning, Nebuchadnezzar was pervaded by the Holy Spirit of the divine minister. He began his bestowals 1 billion years ago. And upon completing his seventh, he created a new spirit of supremacy in the universe of universes, in the universe of universes. So on Pentecost, he bestowed his spirit of truth upon Nebuchadnezzar to accompany the universal presence of the Holy Spirit. So 2,000 years ago, the character of Nebuchadnezzar was forever changed by this. So as I'm thinking about everything that we've been talking about, it seems to me it's fair to say the religion of the Spirit is the religion of Jesus. And the religion of Jesus is manifest in his life and teachings, which are validated and illuminated by the Spirit of truth. And the Midwayers state that Christianity is the best of the religions of the 20th century. It is currently the only religion which recognizes the Spirit of truth, the supreme spirit of religion in Nebuchadnezzar. So that's how I interpreted that phrase, theology of religion. Theology of authority. Back to you.
Thank you, George. I would like to turn to Doreen next and give her a slight variation on the ideas that are on the paper. Is the theology of authority, in effect, a male construct, a construct that is psychologically male, in the sense that authority and domination have traditionally been masculine procedures, I am not going to venture the idea that women have never exercised authority, but the concept of authority on an historic level has been associated with males much more frequently than with females. So is part of this question the contrast between the religion of the spirit and the religion of the mind, the theology of authority, at least partly a difference between the traditional preferences of males and the traditional preferences of females?
Well, thank you, Neil. The interesting thing is, why are authoritarians very attracted to religions? That's where they say most of the people that are authoritarians are either attracted to religion or the military. So, well, then you have power over people. So yes, and of course the church is male dominated, that's for sure. But when you think about it, it's not only what does authoritarian mean? You know, it's bullies. Are you bullies? Do you teach love? Do you teach kindness? Do you teach mercy? What do you teach? It's like, what do they give them? You know, the fear of damnation. If you don't obey the rules, you know, what do they put fear into children because they're the authority and Rome gave them the authority. And it was interesting because it talked about, I was reading something about Mussolini. Mussolini said he was really anti-religion, but then he went to the church, they got married, baptized his kids, because he said in Rome, he said he would find his fascist friends and allies in the church. And that I had a good laugh at. That was amazing. Of course, well, it's power to push people around, to I guess, castigate them, whatever it is. I just find that it's male dominated. Yes, of course, it's an individual thing. It has nothing to do necessarily with male, but you would find in the church, definitely. So if you're asking me that, but look what's happened with authoritarianism, you know, in the church, where they took advantage of children, and you can't say anything because, you know, they get into trouble if they say anything, and you know, fear, you put fear into people. What does that have to do with religion? You know, it's religion to me is something you live, and so, you know, it's devoid of fear. And it's, you know, on the theological level anyway, and it's a religion where there is tolerance and graciousness, you know, and has strength. And this religion has nothing to do with so many things that pervade, you know, what the church tells you, but it pervades our human life. And it's 24 hours a day, it's 7 days a week. It's a religion that's friendly, and it's part of the human being. So the religion to me is not inseparable from philosophy, from ethics, from morality, and, you know, and all the things that we live in our lives. And I know that's not the question you're asking me about male authority, but it's just the contrast that I can't, you know, I don't find it has that flavor when you're dominating people and you're taking tradition and you're pushing this, and instead of coming from the heart and the soul. What's so good natured about that? You know, religion is something you breathe. The air is religion. God is everything. It's in your life and everything you do. That is true religion. And I'm really talking about real religion. I'm not talking about doctrine in the church and what they do. It's, you know, it's just inconsistent. Anyway, what else did I want to say about religion? Well, so what, you know, then I look at why does the church lose so much ground? Why? Because especially, you know, in the developed countries, it's really because of, I wouldn't say, well, maybe I'm going off topic. I was saying because people are searching for something and they're not getting it in the churches. And that's what I was reading. And it said that it's become like, it's like a market, you know, and it's first of all, the reason number one is they have better science today. Okay, so we have science, we have government safety nets, we have smaller families. There is less fear and uncertainty in people's daily lives, and therefore there's less market for religion. So it doesn't matter whether there is authority, that turned them off as well. And it's interesting because when I went to Estonia, they talked about this in one of the speeches. And they said that turned the people off in their area anyway, but mostly Eastern Europe, from the church because it was so domineering in their lives, and you must and you should and you sinned, and here is what you know, it's like your people left the church just for that because they came for love, they came for nurturing, they came for something else. And I think women would probably be better at it than the men. That's for sure. And I really mean it because they have more of the ability for, I guess, compassion and heart, more feeling. So you come from that soul. Well, what are we trying to build in these people? You're trying to build a soul, right? How do you build it? Not from domineering, you know, what do you call it? These priests or anything. But I did read at one time, it said, which again, I love the subjects because I do more investigation of so many things that I come up and find. But it said at one time, and I guess it was more in the Middle Ages, the priests wanted to come to individual homes because people were dropping away from the church. Maybe it was 1800s. I'm not sure. But that's what it said. They were willing to do it, but they didn't allow them to do it. And I thought, well, that's interesting. But I don't know, you know, there's so many difficulties, and it's so hard for me to talk about something that I don't have personal experience in. But I did deal with a lot of priests. Because I worked in a restaurant and they had in the cocktail lounge, and they, oh my goodness, it was all about the money, and they were drinking all the time, constantly for years. So you know, and they're not bad people, but when you have, I guess, that bully pulpit, well, we see it all over, not just in the churches. Oh boy, especially to women and children, they said. And that's what I had read. Especially they're more abusive to women and children. I don't want to keep rambling because my thoughts always don't come in one section. Like I'd love to just unfold but it's all over the place. And I'm sorry, that's how my mind sometimes works when I'm nervous. Anyway, I should write it all down and just read it, and that would probably sound better for your webinar.
Doreen, I am certainly not going to give you a prescription or a recipe. I think you always share very interesting observations with us. Marvin, I would like to turn to you next. And in considering the remarks that others have made, I would ask you to add one additional element that the original paradigm for Christianity, once we got past the first centuries of a subterranean movement, became dominated by government, by the empire. That this pattern of union of church and state, by definition, entailed authority. And so my question for you here is, does the religion of the mind convey authority as an implicit reflection of the long association of church and state that dominated Christianity for over 1,000 years?
I'm sorry. I don't think I could probably respond to your last question there, Neil, right off the top.
Okay.
I don't have.
Go ahead. Say whatever you would like. You have
the
entire question and the comments that everyone else has made.
Yeah, but it's a very interesting question. I want to share a couple of thoughts. One is your last statement. Does theology does theology automatically entail authority, or does this occur so often as to justify a broad association that seems accurate and pervasive? Well, I don't think either one. I don't agree with either one of those statements at the end. And I don't think they're speaking about theology in general. They're speaking about a particular expression of theology, the theology of authority. And there are many other kinds of theology possible. There's the theology of living spiritual experience. There's the theology of nature worship. You know, so I mean, theology is a more broad general term that to me doesn't have characteristics like authority that are consistent. Theology is sort of the philosophical consideration of religious subjects of religious devotion. And it can be many, many different things, some of which are authoritarian in their structure and some of which are wildly creative. You know, the theology of living experience is, you know, wild and woolly. It's not authoritative. So that's one thought. The other thought is if I go back to the paragraph you're citing, which is a great paragraph, the theme that runs throughout that paragraph for me that is explicative, that really explains something, is that there's a distinction between two motivations or purposes in religious function, whether it's theology or institutional practice. There's a distinction in purpose or intention. Either the intention is to tie something down and control it, or the intention is to ride something that you're not going to control, but is a living and ever expressing and moving reality. Like the Urantia book defines truth as not codifiable, right? We can talk about generalities related to it, but truth is a living reality that is unfolding in the moment. And it's more like riding a wild bronco than it is in dressage, you know, where you control the horse precisely and you're graded on the precision of your control. It's all more like riding a wild bronco is living religion. And you look at, if you keep that in mind and you look at this description, then it begins to make sense to me. And so, you know, they say the religion of the mind, the theology of authority requires little or none of these exertions. It doesn't require a lot of effort. Tradition is a safe refuge and an easy path for those fearful and half-hearted souls who instinctively shun the spirit's struggles, interesting language, and mental uncertainties associated with those faith voyages of daring adventure. You know, all this is about spontaneity and living truth and constantly having to react and respond in new ways out upon the high seas of unexplored truth in search for the farther shores of spiritual realities as they may be discovered by the progressive human mind and experienced by the evolving human soul. So for me, this is about contrasting an approach to religion that seeks to tie it down and control it by mental apparatus, and an approach to religion that says it's much larger than either mindal realities, it's living experiential realities, it's relationship realities. It's the living movement of love among beings and between us and God. It's, you know, as they say, alive, free, thrilling, ever moving reality, right? And so that's living religion. And so for me, the distinction is between trying to tie it down and control it and essentially kill it, right? Have it die so you can maintain mastery over it. Between that and riding something, participating in something that is alive and always moving, and we always have to adapt, which is our relationship with God and our relationships with each other. So anyways, I'm not sure I've answered your questions specifically, but try to at least address the broader subject.
Marvin, you did that very well, and I have to reiterate an explanation that I partly gave to Doreen today, but I also gave it in the preceding webinar, that my questions are intended to be stimulative and that your responses are not foreordained in a particular direction for sure, that I treasure the adaptation and the originality that each of you is able to come up with. And that's the important part of our discussion, not exactly adhering to a single thought that emerges out of my mouth. So thank you for your comments, Marvin. Andre, I will now turn to you, and it is partly because since you were first on the first question and you were last on this question, it allows me to recycle my old remark about the first should be last and the last should be first. So
I
here
knew
we
that
are.
was coming. I just knew it.
You knew it was coming.
I knew it.
All right. So I offer you at least the option of addressing the association of church and state, the authority principle, whereby the authority of Christianity had these overtones of domination and control. But you don't have to deal with that. It's up to you. There are a rich range of possibilities that your colleagues have offered. And again, I offer you complete leeway to respond as seems best to you.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think that all the speakers before me dealt with this quite comprehensively. There's very, very little else to be said in terms of the question, the way it's stated. I liked the fact that theology was differentiated from theology of authority. I think that was important because as I think I forget whether it was Bob that stated it or you, Neil, but that theology of authority seems to be a once collocation within the Urantia book. You don't find that phrase ever again, except in that one paragraph. And that's very, very instructive. That's almost begging that they are considering it as a collocation. It's got its own meaning by virtue of the phrase, much like the age of discrimination, if I'm remembering that one correctly, which is not the same as either age or discrimination. It's a collocation that has its own thing, which anyway, that's beside the point. So when you relate it to what you were asking as a question of how that's related to church and state, I think Doreen underscored that. She stated that right away in what she was talking about, and that so often autocracy and dictatorships and authoritarian leaders will turn to, well, it was said religion, but really it's implied the kind of religion we have, which is not religion of the spirit. It's religion of authority. It's which has a theology of authority and is tantamount to religion of the mind. And that works because there is something that has to be believed creedally. You must be a true believer. And in order to believe in an authoritarian government, there's a certain amount of true believer aspect to that as well. You don't find those say being supported by those that I would judge, and this is purely opinion, I would not judge those people that hold to authoritarian regimes or to even authoritarian government of any kind, however mildly authoritarian, without suspending a certain amount of criticism of that authority. There's a premium on loyalty to the creed or to the person, not necessarily to living truth, which very often runs up against that. We see that happening today in Hong Kong, where those that would prefer liberty are being thrown in prison, and laws have been passed, draconian laws, because those individuals are striving for something that is coming out of what I would call unconsciously lived religion, true religion. That's what leads to a quest for liberty, even if there isn't a religion with a conscious relationship to God. We're told in the Urantia book that that religious living can be quite unconscious. And I think we see a great deal of that happening today. And most of the conflicts we see today, I would maintain, are between those of that are living religiously, consciously or unconsciously, and those that are holding to either religions of authority or authoritarian governments. And that's where we see, whether you look at Iran, whether you look at Turkey today, Hungary, whatever, you see that happening over and over. I would just throw out parenthetically and as an aside, my theology, and this is something that Marvin underscored, and I think might have been stated by George or alluded to by George, the idea that, yes, theology doesn't have to be associated with authority, even though it was in that particular sense in that paragraph. I would like to say that the consummator of universe destiny is in my theology, and that's not in a lot of other people's theology. So there.
I think you get the reward for the unusual phrase of the day, at least. The consummator of universe destiny, I believe, is a term that occurs once in the Urantia book. And I'm not sure that anyone has ever come up with a coherent explanation that really is satisfying. I think the revelators have thrown that in as a way of piquing our curiosity more than anything else. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I see a request for a return visit by my close colleague, Bob, and you have the floor, sir.
Yeah, Neil, just to real quick to follow up a little bit on what Andre said and what he just underscored. I started out by saying that theology is always a study of your religion. This whole theme that we've addressed here with the word authority deals with authoritarianism, and I think that Doreen brought that up fairly well when she highlighted Mussolini being able to pull off the religious aspect in things that he was doing with fascism. But there's a little there seemed to be, to me, a little bit of a paradox with this term authority, because the word authority comes from the Latin word augere, which is to create, to enlarge, to be able to grow, and it's similar to the words author and augment. So if we take the real depth of authority, and owing to the fact that we're talking about external authority here, the real religion of spirit, true religion, the religion of the spirit, it is not the supernatural authority imposed by both Protestantism, part of Christianity, and Catholicism. Both take supernatural authority and apply it to either the text, the Bible, or to the individuals, the Pope, the bishops, etc. So they're really not different. But in the religion of the spirit, this term authority takes on a little bit slightly different aspects when you think of what the word really means. If the word really means to create, to enlarge, to grow, and if in fact theology is the study of my religion, then as Andre said, the consummator of universe destiny, I have to develop a theology based upon how my soul has taken that spiritual experience, that I'm now conscious in my mind of it. Because we talked, again, that a true religious experience, I'm only conscious in my mind of it, but I've experienced it in my soul. This this is a very interesting set of physics that when we truly delve into the religion of the spirit, I think that we're going to probably advance the word authority a little bit more than even where Jesus had taken it. And maybe if I read it again, maybe that's where he did take it. So back over to you, Neil.
Thank you. I think I will say on my authority as the moderator that you have the last word on this discussion. I would say for the purposes of the coherence of this webinar that we have now concluded two questions today that were very probing. Actually, three of them, if we take into account the previous discussion during the preceding webinar, all of them related to the paragraphs 10 and 11 in section 5 of paper 155. There is now a shift of gears in the document, in the essay, and in my voice, the middle of page 17 contains one paragraph of general observations that I will proceed to read myself. I give a preview of coming attractions by directing my remarks to Marvin. Marvin, when I finish reading this paragraph of about 10 lines, roughly, I will ask you to read the quotation that appears in the box after it. It's taken from section 5 of paper 170. Do I have agreement on your part? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So I will proceed to read this paragraph, in effect, editorial comment of mine. It reads as follows: if we analyze the world as it is and not as we would like it to be, it is clear that Christ Michael's epical efforts to promote more advanced levels of spiritual awareness and religious observance on our planet Urantia currently remain more akin to idealistic aspirations than practical reality, at least in relation to the great majority of human beings who share the planet with us. Does this mean that his campaign has failed and that the mission he received from Emmanuel has proven vain and unavailing? No, certainly not, for such reckless appraisals are far too strongly linked with characteristically human approaches to time and duration. The Midway Commission reassures us, and now I yield to Marvin to read the quotation.
Mistake not, there is in the teachings of Jesus an eternal nature, which will not permit them forever to remain unfruitful in the hearts of thinking men and women, I might add. The kingdom, as Jesus conceived it, has to a large extent failed on earth. For the time being, an outward church has taken its place. But you should comprehend that this church is only the larval stage of the thwarted spiritual kingdom, which will carry it through this material age and over into a more spiritual dispensation, where the Master's teachings may enjoy a fuller opportunity for development. Thus does the so-called Christian church become the cocoon in which the kingdom of Jesus concept now slumbers. The kingdom of the divine brotherhood is still alive and will eventually and certainly come forth from this long submergence, just as surely as the butterfly eventually emerges as the beautiful unfolding of its less attractive creature of metamorphic development. Can I share just a brief passage, Neil, that's very related? I was going to share it at the tail end of our conversation, but it's very much part of this nice segue that you've offered us.
Go ahead.
It's 155:3-8, and they, speaking of Jesus, they say, he never grew weary of pointing out to the 12 the great danger of accepting religious symbols and ceremonies in the place of religious experience. His whole earth life was consistently devoted to the mission of thawing out the frozen forms of religion into the liquid liberties of enlightened sonship. There's a nice little piece of alliteration. thawing out the frozen forms of religion into the liquid liberties of enlightened sonship.
Thank you. At this time of year, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, it's hard to think about anything that is frozen. But in any event, I appreciate that additional insight. I would introduce the discussion of this paragraph by commenting on the fact that it has at least two main lines of analysis. On the one hand, there is the metaphor of the butterfly, the larval stage, the unfolding, a biological process of development. On the other hand, there is a timeline for now, and through this material age over into a more spiritual dispensation. So I think from the perspective of our discussion, I would like to concentrate initially on the timeline, this material age and over into a more spiritual dispensation. I would invite people to comment on that implication in regard to timing. George, may I interest you in that question?
Yeah, I answered this last week. I think we're in a material age. We're going in, we're told in several places that the next age will be a spiritual age, and that what's required is to rectify the current philosophic confusion regarding religion. So, we know where we are, we know what the next stage is going to be, and we know what we have to do to get there. So how long it takes us to get there depends on how long it takes us to come up with a new and appealing philosophy of living.
Thank you. I would simply ask a follow-up question concerning the phrase "a more spiritual dispensation." Now, the word dispensation in the Urantia book has a technical meaning with judgments and sequence of events, but I am reluctant to say that that is what it means in this paragraph. Do you think it is related to that idea of the group judgment, or would you say that it is a more general usage?
That's a hard one to answer. I mean, the fourth epical revelation coincided with the beginning of the Christian dispensation. Fifth epical revelation, does it coincide? I don't remember any specific references to it. On the other hand, this is the fifth epical revelation, and we're told we're on the very brink of a new spiritual age, which kind of implies a dispensation. So I think that's about as definite as an answer as I can give to your question.
Well, you answered an ambiguous question with an ambiguous reply. I think that was entirely appropriate, George. These are matters of interpretation. I think in this case, as in many others, the Midware Commission have given us formulations that we have every right to interpret and discuss from our own perspectives. Andre, what do you do with this timeline for now and a material age and a more spiritual dispensation?
Well, material age doesn't seem to be that long. They say we're even now somewhat out of the material age. I don't know that that means that we're into a more spiritual dispensation. I tend to pay attention to the words that they use. Why didn't they say into a more spiritual age, a more spiritual epoch? They had a lot of words to use, but they said dispensation, and they've defined dispensation for us. So that would imply that they conceive of a new dispensation coming. Now, is that coming quickly, or will that require a number of epochs in order for that to be brought about? It's very, very muddy as far as I can tell. And they don't presume to know sequences of events. They don't presume to know whether a magisterial mission will be next. They don't presume to know whether the entire dispensational sequence has been deranged. They don't know when Macaventa Melchizedek might seize the reins as vicegerent planetary prince and so perhaps upset the order of the rotation of the 4 and 20 counselors, through the governor generalships, of which we are now less than 10 years away, to the changing of the guard from the 20th to the 21st. So with all of that in the mix, I tend to think that dispensation, as far as societal evolution and religious evolution are concerned, this is going to take a while. It may be that we go through some kind of a suddenly, but even if we do go through a suddenly where there's now a cohort of more spiritually living individuals that act as a beacon on the planet, and who knows who and what that might be, it will be, as far as I can see, based on history, only a vanguard cohort, in the same way that, we talk about the Renaissance, for instance, as having been this wonderful age of, new thought and new invention. And then we think of the Enlightenment, in Western civilization the same way. And yet it was only a vanguard for which that was happening. It was handfuls of people that were forward thinking like that. The mass of humanity was just doing their thing, trying to rub 2 nickels together, 2 shillings, whatever it was, penny farthings. And what that means for the rest of the world coming along, I don't know. But there clearly is a vanguard that is developing. And the question is, will that vanguard cohort begin to have sway over the direction of the evolution, the spiritual evolution of the planet?
Thank you. Again, an intuitive and logical reply that opens up more possibilities than the specific answers. And I think, frankly, you, like the others, have been keeping open your options in ways that I find fully appropriate. I'm going to try Bob now and see what he does with another timeline phrase. And this timeline phrase is "for the time being," in the 3rd line of the paragraph as it appears on the paper. For the time being, an outward church has taken its place, and the "its" refers to the kingdom as Jesus conceived it. What is this phrase, "for the time being"? How do you read that?
Well, I think we have to go back to the idea of dispensation again. I took a look back at the section on the Master Seraphim of Planetary Supervision, and when they discussed the different groups of seraphim, the 12 different groups, they mentioned 4 or 5 of them, as what number group that they were. For example, the epical angels are the 3rd group assigned to the planet during the current dispensation. The angels of the future, for example, is on the planet since, has thus functioned since the beginning of the current dispensation. Well, we know that the current dispensation was when Jesus's bestowal was finished. We know that a dispensation is a functional and spiritual epoch that has to play itself out to some logical conclusion to where the next one can take place. Owing for the fact that this planet is so out of sync, what has been provided in the revelation that gives us information that takes us well beyond what may be a 2nd or 3rd avonal bestowal teaching might do, leads me to believe that for the time being, we may be looking at a magisterial dispensation as the very next one. There's so many suddenlies, as George brought up, that happen on this planet, that we can turn around and we're going to see something that's going to happen that you can never predict. For example, science fiction never predicted the personal computer. Goodness, who would have predicted that, all of these industrial sorts of things, these informational types of things. Well, we're going to see the same thing happen on the religious side, on the spiritual side, I think also. So for the time being is, until the next dispensation is, this particular revelation, I think, is going to have to support the vanguard, and these ideas have to be thrashed out. We're still in these webinars, we're still scratching the surface on what is spirit, what is spiritual experience, what are the physics of the religion of the spirit, for example. So it may take a long time, but these suddenlies on this planet, on this experimental planet, never cease to surprise me. Back over to you, Neil.
Thank you. Doreen, I'm going to focus once again on the phrase "for the time being," but I'm remembering comments of yours about the mentality of believers who are associated with an affiliation, or who are affiliated with an organized church to the degree that they cannot see any other option, that this is the dominant mode for their understanding of religion. And so, to simplify this question, an outward church has taken its place, namely its place of the kingdom that Jesus conceived for the time being. Is this because the great majority of believers cannot imagine anything but an organized church in their way of thinking?
Not at all. And if you would give me the leeway, I did some research on the religion, Christianity. And it was a survey, and this is the young people. This is like ages 18 to 34. Because when you're talking about how we're going to progress, here are some of the questions, and here is their answers. They said there is such confusion in the churches. It said Jesus, they asked the question of these people, was Jesus born of mortal parents, or was he created by God? Well, their responsibility is that, and one other thing, they said the smallest sin deserves eternal damnation, and most people said no. And they were confused about, was he created, or was he born of mortal parents? And that was one of the questions. Then they said, God counts a person as righteous not because of one's work, but only because of one's faith in Jesus Christ. 93% said yes, they don't have to do anything as long as they have faith. Religious belief is a matter of personal opinion, they said. It's not about objective truth. Majority agreed. The Bible's condemnation of course, homosexuality doesn't apply today. Of course, that's because the Bible says it. Ethics. For the first time, more Americans agree that the Bible teachings on same-sex relationships is outdated than disagree. Okay. At the same time, young adults appear to be drifting away from the Christian worldview into other areas. The millennials are most likely to agree that the Bible is not literally true. The Bible, like all sacred writings, contain helpful accounts of ancient myths, but it is not literally true. So, and so the results they were talking about, they said there's an urgent need for sound biblical teachings and the bold preachings of the gospel, because millions of people don't understand the holiness of God, the reality of sin, and the way of salvation in Jesus Christ. They said there's a lot of work that has to be done, and it's a hope that the findings will serve the church and its efforts to reach more people with the faithful proclamation of the truth in God's word. They said there's really something very wrong. And the other thing that I found was, they said the churches, it's many people really, and this is just generally, religion is not merely a way to deal with fear, uncertainty, and emotional difficulties. They said that many people follow a particular religious way of life because they believe that it is true. The problem of the analysis, the market analysis of the future of religion, as well as the market-based practices in contemporary religious communities, is that religion at its best is not a consumer product. Rather, at its best, faith calls for sacrifice, unselfishness, love, and a willingness to remove oneself from the center of the universe, so to speak. So in order to be willing to live in such a way, a self-centered approach to religion will not do. Rather, one must believe that he or she is living in a way that is consistent with reality in order to motivate an unselfish approach to life. And it did talk about, it said we have psychotropic drugs today that it relieves them of their, their insecurities and their issues. They don't have to go to a church, and get some feeding that doesn't apply. They're really looking, they said for, and I forgot where I wrote it, but they said they're gravitating towards spirituality, meditation. Those are the outside groups and not the church. And this is the younger people. They just can't identify it anymore at all. It has no appeal. So when you're talking about a timeline, first you got to open the door and bring them in. You've got to give them something, to feed them with before we could talk about, how the future is going to turn out. Because why would, now he's talking about, we talked about the Daniels last week, and they said they come here and they check on the planet and get updates, but they said they're not coming here until, of course, the people are intelligent, less animalistic, and of course have some sense of religion, because our generation is going to be gone. But what are we looking forward to? What's the future here? And if they don't have anything and they're looking for just a release like drugs, how is that helping? I'm in a way, I'm not worried about it because I know the spirit of truth and and the Holy Spirit and the thought of justice will lead them where they have to be. But I believe times are going to get much worse. And that's when I think there's going to be a shift. The worse times get, the more frightened people are, the more they're going to seek for some, authority, even though we just talked about authority. But otherwise, I don't see them turning there unless you had some, some profound leader that was so spiritual and, like Martin Luther King or any of these people that really spoke to their heart and soul, because they don't know what they're looking for. And that's what it said to me. They really are confused. So I'll stop there. And there was much more, but I know you don't have time. So.
Thank you. You've given me some thoughts that I'd like to put before Marvin, since he's the next speaker. And this, once again, relates to the phrase "for the time being." But this sentence goes on, an outward church has taken its place, which implies that there is a place, there is a function, that the kingdom, as Jesus conceived it, has a function, and the church has taken its place, is in effect, if I paraphrase that, is operating in lieu of. But what Doreen has said basically is that increasingly, at least from her perspective, the church is not operating effectively in carrying the place as Jesus conceived it, the place of the kingdom of heaven. And so my question for you is to adapt that idea that the relative ability of the church to take the place of the kingdom as Jesus conceived it seems to be fading. And so instead of a replacement or a substitution, Doreen's remarks imply that we have a void or a gap, or at least a substitution that is partially decaying and leading to a void. How do you deal with that, Marvin?
Well, a few thoughts. I think the metaphor, the butterfly metaphor, what they're saying is the church is the cocoon. It's basically the wrapping, the enclosure within which the concept of the kingdom, as Jesus originally taught it, slumbers, right? And is being metamorphosed, it's being changed. It's going through a metamorphic development as we speak. In terms of the time frame, I want to share a couple of passages. And I think they give us a fairly clear sense. And I think they have a sense of the time transition involved in this process. And I think it's about a millennium, about a 1,000 years. And they make this statement in 99, paper 99, this new and on, they speak of in many number of places of our society being characterized by an endless procession of changes, turbulence, constant innovation and change. And we see the pace of change accelerating almost exponentially now. With each passing decade, almost it accelerates further, which is very destabilizing, confusing for people in the midst of this flux. And so in this paper 99, they say this new and oncoming social order will not settle down complacently for a millennium. The human race must become reconciled to a procession of changes, adjustments, and readjustments. Mankind is on the march toward a new and unrevealed planetary destiny. But the implication is that at the end of roughly a millennium, this new and oncoming social order will settle down complacently, right? I mean, they're saying it's going to be turbulent for about 1,000 years, and then it will resettle into a new form. And then there's this other passage, and this is just a couple of a number of them that point to this, from the section 87.7, regardless of the drawbacks and handicaps, every new revelation of truth has given rise to a new culture, symbolic spiritual culture. And even the restatement of religion must develop a new and appropriate symbolism. So they're stating an imperative that is present tense. They don't say must at some far future time develop a new and appropriate symbolism. They say modern man must find some adequate symbolism, meaning present tense, for his new and expanding ideas, ideals, and loyalties. And then they use this fascinating phrase. They say this enhanced symbol, which is what is being gestated in the cocoon, I think, of our current circumstances. This enhanced symbol must arise out of religious living, spiritual experience, and this higher symbolism of a higher civilization, which is such an intriguing phrase, must be predicated on the concept of the fatherhood of God and be pregnant with a mighty ideal of the brotherhood of man. And so, I mean, after a lot of thinking and research in the text, to me, it's a fairly simple picture. You know, Jesus' original explication of the gospel was stated in terms of the kingdom of heaven. He tried to, he would have preferred, and he tried to present it in terms of the living family relationships. But he relented under the pressures of the messianic concept and the reality of the kingdoms being the pervasive governmental form in that day and age. He relented, and but he was not happy about it. He sort of compromised and went with the kingdom of heaven. But he said the people of another age will better understand the gospel when it's understood in terms of family relationships. And so for me, the new and higher symbolism that is struggling to be born out of this cocoon is the spiritual family symbolism. And the Urantia revelation is being provided to us as an emergency revelation, and they're giving us all the tools we need for our evolutionary efforts, beginning now, you know, in these early generations, in nascent form, to evolve a symbolic expression of this new and higher symbolism of the next stage of civilization, which is struggling to be born, to break out of the cocoon and into its new expression, metamorphic expression, as the butterfly, able to fly, whereas the caterpillar could only crawl along the ground. I mean, it's a new and upstepped expression of Jesus' identical gospel. And we're being called, I think evolutionarily, as a people in association with revelation, we are being called to the adventure of the birthing of this new and higher symbolism. And I think it will take many hundreds of years, and that at the culmination of roughly a millennium, as they say, when things, and will help people stabilize and carry through this chaos of the next 1,000 years. And then we'll be on hand and much more prominent culturally to serve as the primary symbolism in the beginnings of the next stage of civilization. I think they make a clear case for it. And I think my sense is our marching orders are really set out for us. We should be busy about this endeavor. But I think it's worthy of discussion. And I think the questions you pose, Neil, I think set the stage for at least some opinions on it.
Thank you, Marvin. You have given me a good transition to the other element of this paragraph that I identified when we started talking about it. And that is the symbolism, the metaphor, the idea of a larval stage, the cocoon, the emergence of the butterfly. And in the middle of this, it states that the kingdom of Jesus's concept now slumbers, is asleep in the so-called Christian church. But in the next sentence again, the kingdom of the divine brotherhood is still alive. So we have an interesting metaphor that the kingdom is alive, but it is asleep, and that it slumbers in the Christian church. They use the phrase, the so-called Christian church, which is interesting. I don't think I would get away with that if I were to use that phrase so-called in writing of mine. I'd probably be wrapped around someone's axle and dragged through the wilderness. But they have used the phrase the so-called Christian church as a way of distinguishing the organized institution from Christ, and that it is not really Christ who is replicated in the so-called Christian church. So Andre, I'm going to turn to you for the first additional observations about larval stage and cocoon and slumbering but still alive. How would you deal with that?
Well, that's what strikes me, and I think Marvin alluded to many of those ideas, and I think we all can understand that surely the organizational aspect of the Christian church, and surely creedal belief, is not what any God worthy of the name, once you've discovered the God of the Urantia book and have had a living relationship with that God. Even if you haven't discovered the Urantia book, if you have a living relationship with God, that can hardly be satisfying to be held down. And it really is a matter of being held down more than being raised up by the Christian church. At least that was my experience early on. Now, maybe it may itself be undergoing some metamorphosis where, for instance, emergent Christianity is starting to do some of that uplift. But, my question is that going to translate to the rest of Christianity, to all of its sects? Or is that going to be a vanguard movement out of which the understanding that, personal religion is really what it's all about? That this is where the transformation, not only of the individual, but of civilization is going to occur. Is that truly understood? Nevertheless, they see it. The revelators see that is going to happen. The question is, what do we do to facilitate? What can we do to facilitate that? If it's an outgrowth, then there's nothing we can do to make it grow faster, in the sense of we can't get it to grow faster any more than I could as a teenager get my chin hairs, to grow faster. But what we can do is to provide the soil, the sunlight, the water, the favorable conditions that are talked about to help foster this. And I think the revelation is here to do that. And perhaps there are catalytic things that can occur. The question would be identifying what are those catalysts. Are they essentially other people living according to the life and teachings of Jesus, living out their religion, or are there other things that can be done that act as the soil, the sunlight, the water for these outgrowths to occur and transformations to occur?
Thank you, Andre. Profound questions as always. I would like to turn to George next and ask him for, in effect, an appraisal of the ideas that are rather poetic, that are metaphorical, that involve a kind of process. George, do you see these explanations of larval stage and cocoon and butterfly emerging merely as poetry, as symbolism, or do you think they really conceal some kind of evolution, some kind of set of events that is happening now or that will eventually come to pass?
I think it describes a potential that exists right now. And I'd like to read a couple of quotes, short quotes from the book. Paper 194, section, section 2. The spirit of truth in the heart reveals the creator son to men and comes really to lead all believers into all truth. So the spirit of truth reveals the creator son. And then in paper 33, section 1, it says the spirit of truth exerts the same spiritual drawing power, spirit gravity, from the headquarters of the local universe that the eternal Son of Paradise would exert if he were personally present on Salvington. So the spirit of truth exerts a drawing power from Salvington, and what is concealed, hidden in the Christian church is this recognition of the spirit of truth. So I think this is, in my mind, the potential immortality of the Christian church. Everything else is scaffolding or dross or error, but this is its recognition of the spirit of truth, in my mind, is what makes it potentially eternal.
Thank you. That's very interesting. I'm going to turn to Doreen with precisely that point about the spirit of truth, the cocoon, the larval stage. Do you believe that the spirit of truth and the ministry of the various categories of seraphim and other spiritual beings are in effect helping to bring about this emergence? Or do you think of this set of ideas, which are essentially a metaphor, are essentially poetry?
Oh, no, I think it certainly has merit. Because, number one, if you think that these young people, if they haven't got anything and everything is, because what I mean by anything that has value in their life, they really need something, and they don't know sometimes when you're very young, but the questions they ask, it's like, what is life about? Same questions we all ask. Why are we here? Where are we going? What is it like to be a good person? How do you find happiness? This is their questions, because there is no basis, no foundation that is given them the understanding to search in the right areas, because, like I said before, they threw the baby out with the bathwater. Most of them probably don't even believe in a God. Truth is whatever you want it to be, and this is what you hear today. So I'm not basing everything on today. Yes, I think it has to be a rebirth, has to be something that a catalyst that's going to bring them out of their shell to seek, and kids do, you know, young people, even 35-year-olds, they're not very mature today. Like I remember being at that age, I already had 2 kids and they were older, but it doesn't matter. The funny thing is, it's like, do they know what they're looking for? How do you find it if you don't know, if you're not given anything? Where are you going to find it? So they do look for alternatives, and but they are connected to one another. That's what I do believe. They are loyal to each other in their age groups. I don't think, you know, you could see that they gravitate in such packs, you know, like tribal groups. Okay, because you have a leader and the leader is taken, and then they follow. That's what I said. You need a voice. You need a strong voice, a spiritual voice. And the book, you know, this is what these kids from that, these are, when I was in Stony, they were all young people. They were not older at, you know, asking these questions. And they said, you know, they figure we're going to try to plant the seeds with the Urantia book as much as we can. But that's what I think other people are asking. Where do you plant the seeds? How do you plant the seeds? Because the answers are all here. I mean, I found it, you know, not that it was the only thing I found, but definitely it opened up a pathway. So yeah, I was in a larval stage, I would say, to some extent, except my personal relationship with God, but the rest, you know, I didn't know which way to go as far as that. I didn't even understand, what are you talking about? You know, the brotherhood of mankind. They were good people and they were not so good people. That's how I judged everybody. I didn't say, you know, I'm only going to look for the good things in people and disregard everything else, which I do today. So that's the growth experience. But you can't have it, you know, all at once. It's got to take hundreds of years. I can't see that this is going to be a reversal or a reflection of what's happening today. There's combinations out there that are in motion, and the seraphim and the angels of nation, they're working, but you have to make the decisions, then they will help you. If you do not ask for the help, they're not coming to your aid. You have to know where you want to go and what you need to go there with. So if I want to live beyond this lifetime, you know, because most people, they're scared of even thinking about what's the end here. Yes, they need to have the information. So the internet is doing a great job. There's radio shows. I heard millions of people listen to some of these radio shows that talk about the Urantia. Not from anybody who belongs to organizations. I heard it outside. They're tuning in because maybe they're not swallowing it hook, line, and sinker, but it's planting a seed. So it's coming from many areas, and it'll grow one day, it'll blossom. But Jesus was never in a hurry, and any religion which you dump too fast on people is detrimental. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Doreen. I would like to turn now to Bob and try to address the symbolism or the metaphorical ideas of this paragraph: larval stage, cocoon, butterfly, still alive, and ask him whether this is simply a symbolic and rather literary portrayal, in effect aimed at the future, or whether there is also a process going on now that is slow perhaps, but that is a reality too, in the sense of the spiritual elements that many people have referred to actually affecting the character of human beings and the direction of the change of perceptions in regard to God and the religion of the spirit. Is this something that is happening maybe slowly, or is it simply a poetic metaphor?
Well, it's a metaphor that's describing reality. As George was bringing up the spirit of truth, and you know, you went back and asked another question about that. You know, the spirit of truth comes with every Avanal bestowal mission. So the planets that had come before Michael's bestowal as Jesus had the spirit of truth, which was both the Father and the Son. When Jesus bestowed this spirit of truth, for all those previous planets, it somehow amalgamated. I think they used the word associated, the two spirits of truth. But Urantia has just the Creator's Son's spirit of truth. We've never had an Avanal. What was interesting as we read either in the Bible or in the Revelation, you know, or in the Ranchi papers, at Pentecost, something really significant happened that was very different. And I think that was the beginning of the cocoon. So as I started rethinking that the spirit of truth also, by the way, has to, or does, translate every generation in the language and vernacular, the truth of the cosmic truth, and of course draws the individual, you know, back to Michael. So there was a paragraph that kind of really stood out to me, and I didn't think I was going to use this, but let me read this. This is from Auguste Sabatier in 1904 on his page 154 in the book, Religion of Authority and the Religion of the Spirit. He says that the Reformation forever disorganized the old system of authority. That system rested upon two pillars, Holy Scriptures and tradition. The clash of Catholic and Protestant polemics destroyed them both. In the name of Scripture, the Protestants overthrew the authority of tradition. In the name of tradition, the Catholics well nigh annulled the Scriptures. Without tradition, the Scriptures are without external support and cannot become a dogma. They remain simply historic documents subject to the appreciation and interpretation of individual reason. He's making a statement here that I think is true, in that during that period of time, I said that 100 years or so, when that the vanguard of intelligent folks that were writing about these sorts of things, as this individual has, that wound up in our revelation, I think is something for us to think about a little bit. And I think that's what's slumbering right now. These two pillars have been either broken or pulled down or something. And if we look at the way that the industrial part of our society, planetary society, has grown, it's probably necessary to have that happen to be able to move to the next spiritual level. So I think that that the idea of this cocoon and the slumbering makes most sense. And it seems to me now that since the turn of the century, since the turn of the 20th century, we're seeing a gradual erosion, and then out of this little chaos, we're going to see, as Doreen brought up, some of this vortex that Steve mentioned last week, that's going to wind up being the nice eddy that we can pass along and maybe move to a more global picture of the religion of the spirit. Over.
Thank you, Bob. In this case, too, I think you have had the concluding opportunity to discuss this. I would now like to read just the brief introductory remarks that appear at the bottom of page 17. And after that, I request that Andre be prepared to read the quotation that begins with the word ecclesiasticism at the top of page 18. So if that's acceptable to Andre, we will get going in that sequence. The introductory remarks read as follows. Nonetheless, the Midwear Commission informs us that the various Christian denominations of our era actually are obstacles to the real religion of Jesus and the wholehearted acceptance of his teachings, which leads us to the paragraph beginning with the word ecclesiasticism. Andre, please.
Ecclesiasticism is at once and forever incompatible with that living faith, growing spirit, and firsthand experience of the faith comrades of Jesus in the brotherhood of man, in the spiritual association of the kingdom of heaven. The praiseworthy desire to preserve traditions of past achievement often leads to the defense of outgrown systems of worship. The well-meant desire to foster ancient thought systems effectually prevents the sponsoring of new and adequate means and methods designed to satisfy the spiritual longings of the expanding and advancing minds of modern men. Likewise, the Christian churches of the 20th century stand as great but wholly unconscious obstacles to the immediate advance of the real gospel, the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. 195, 10:8.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I would say that there is a great deal in that single paragraph that will repay considerable discussion during our webinar next week. I think it would be a mistake to try to have analysis of the paragraph start right now because we are in our final few minutes. I will note, however, that Marvin has asked me privately whether he could be recognized to read a quotation that would go in some complementary direction, but not exactly related to this paragraph. And I recognize him for that purpose.
Oh, thank you, Neil. You've been asking us a lot about timing, and it's interesting in the passage that Andre just read, they speak about the immediate advance. So that has an interesting implication for timing. The passage I wanted to read is the one that Bob alluded to, which has been in my thinking a lot lately, and it's Jesus speaking to his key followers, and Jesus says, "I declare that the gospel is like the seed of the living being." This goes to the question of the cocoon issue. That it is like the seed of the living being, which from generation to generation, while it remains the same living seed, unfailingly unfolds itself in new manifestations and grows acceptably in channels of new adaptation to the peculiar needs and conditions of each successive generation. The revelation I have made to you is a living revelation. And they italicize those two words. And I desire that it shall bear appropriate fruits in each individual and in each generation in accordance with the laws of spiritual growth, increase, and adaptive development. From generation to generation, this gospel must show increasing vitality and exhibit greater depth of spiritual power. So there's this sense of as Bob said, in company with Jesus' Spirit of Truth, this endeavor that's an ongoing endeavor to readapt and re-express the gospel in ways suitable to each generation, our current generation. So it's just very sort of related to all of what we've been talking about, I think.
Thank you, Marvin. I appreciate your initiative, and I do believe, as you have said, that series of observations and the quotation you read is quite relevant for our purposes. Now we are at this point at the end of our webinar today, and for the purposes of the ongoing activities that we will carry out next week, I would like to explain, as I said to you, the participants in the discussion we had before the program actually started, that when we conclude this essay, Revelation Revealed, it's an insert to Revelation Revealed, but the essay itself is called Living the Real Religion of Jesus. I will then ask participants to go back to the beginning of the essay living the real religion of Jesus, and consider it segment by segment with observations as to whether a particular segment is meaningful and important, whether it serves the purpose of depicting elements of the real religion of Jesus. So that is what we will do starting next week, assuming that we finish discussing this paragraph and the two formal questions that follow it, questions S and T. So thank you very much for a very interesting discussion, and I look forward to continuing our examination of these issues next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
You all.
everybody.
Good to see you all.
Neil.